We are going to get into the NFL offseason because is it fair to say, Dolloff, that the first domino of the NFL offseason dropped on Monday, or reportedly dropped on Monday, I should say?
I suppose in that piece of T Higgins news, yeah. I mean, like he's the big domino, right? Like
first big domino.
He's the big he's the big free agent, right? Like I know there's other big stories like Myles Garrett is going to get traded, Cooper Kupp's going to get traded, but when you talk about the free agent market, which is the first thing that happens in the offseason, of course, like T Higgins was the big fish. He's the guy that every team that is truly receiver needing wanted to go out and get, and sounds like he's going to stay in Cincinnati. The Bengals are letting Jermaine Pratt, I believe his name is, the linebacker. They're letting him go basically because they want to keep their offensive pieces together, I think is the report. So not surprised that it always sort of turns out this way, Barth, where like you talk about a guy for 2-3 years almost. They were like, wait till he's a free agent, just wait till he gets to free agency and he signs the extension. So I know like the extension hasn't been signed yet, but I feel like that's where this is going with T Higgins.
No, I mean, I as I said during most of the season, like this is why I was so big on the DK Metcalf thing, because I never thought T Higgins was going to become available. And just to fill in the blanks here for those who missed it, James Rapien, he covers the Bengals for Sports Illustrated. He's the one reporting that not only is Higgins getting tagged, but in that report, he talks about how this feels different than last year. Higgins was tagged last year to play under the tag. There was no long-term plan. That's when it seemed like he was going to get traded because guys don't usually play under that tag, especially at that position. But this year he says, no, this is, just to get the extension done, to get them to the next step, which would obviously be a long-term extension. Now, Jamar Chase also needs a new contract. A lot of people have pointed to Trey Hendrickson, their star defensive end, needing a new contract. And people have kind of looked at it and said, well, they can't keep all of them. So the Patriots, if it's I'm not going to let Chase go, but if they're keeping Higgins, you go after Hendrickson. I think one of the biggest mistakes being put out there right now is that the Bengals can't keep all three. Will they? I don't know. But
that's true. They got to figure out Jamar Chase before they even figure out T Higgins. I know T Higgins is the immediate need now, but they got to keep room for Jamar Chase.
I would say this. Joe Burrow, we've seen publicly, has pushed hard to keep this core together. From talking to people in Cincinnati, I think he's pushing just as hard, if not harder, behind the scenes for the same thing. I don't think it's him. When he goes on ESPN and says, we got to keep the band together, it's not just a quarterback kind of hyping up his guys. He means that. He's sending a message to ownership. Now, if you're Bengals ownership, you go to Joe Burrow and you say, all right, you want that? What are you willing to do for us? We saw a quarterback here for years that would rework his contract. And it didn't always mean taking less money. It just meant structuring it differently. That would rework his contract and do what he needed to do and do the gymnastics he needed to do to make sure the team could keep key players in place. Frankly, I'm surprised more quarterbacks don't do that, seeing the success that guy, Tom Brady, had in New England. If Burrow wants them to keep everybody and he's willing to be flexible in his contract, they're going to keep everybody. Now, if I'm the Patriots, I still stay in touch, right? It's super easy to say now on February 18th, that it's the 18th, right? February 18th, that, yeah, we want to re-sign T Higgins. We want to keep everybody, blah, blah, blah. Start getting closer to that deadline. You start getting close to camp. Maybe things change. So, it's not over till it's over. You keep communicating, and maybe this turns into a trade situation instead of outright free agency. But I wouldn't sleep on the idea that the Bengals can keep the band together. I don't think that's unrealistic.
No, it's not unrealistic at all, because I feel like that's their plan, to go back to the Ian Rappaport thing, or they're trying to keep their core offensive pieces together. Burrow, obviously. Chase is an obvious one, but Higgins is where you start to talk about the core. Like, the core isn't just Burrow and Chase. Like, they want to keep those three together. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Trey Hendrickson doesn't stay in Cincinnati. He goes and signs elsewhere.
Well, so if
he gets a big money contract, he becomes maybe the highest paid pass rusher in football wherever he goes. So I just see the Bengals keeping that sort of big three, as you call it, on offense together, and they'll figure out everything else. Like, the Bengals, they're not one of the best run organizations in the league. They tend to cut corners financially, but when it comes to Joe Burrow, like, they sort of got to maximize the time they have with Burrow in the organization as their franchise guy. He's the best quarterback they've ever had. Apologies to Boomer Esiason, but they got to try to win a Super Bowl with Joe Burrow, and I think their best chance to do that is to keep that offensive core together and figure out the rest.
It is a tough spot to be in, because for where the Bengals are, and by the way, Hendrickson he has one more year under contract, but he's a pre-agent. He's a guy they got to take care of.
And sorry, I don't want to turn this into a Bengals podcast, but for the Patriots side of it, like, yeah, you keep tabs on potentially trading for him. Like I sort of liken it to stories like reporters will kind of leak stories sometimes. Like the agent will try to get it out there, or the team will try to get it out there that like they intend to release this guy. And then later in the day, oh, never mind, he's being traded. So it's like they report things before the transaction ever goes through because the team sort of wants to get it out there, make teams know that he's available, and then maybe they swing a deal with someone else. So like, I don't know that this is going to be that sort of situation, but it is sort of a signal that like, we intend to keep T Higgins long term is how they've, termed it to what's his James Rapian. I was going to say Napier. But Rapian. So the way they relate it to him is that they want to sign T Higgins long term, but it's also a signal to the Patriots and other teams that are like, yeah, you can try to trade for him, but it's going to have to be under this tag.
Right. So let's assume that T Higgins is not available. Right. Let's say he's off the board. Now, where do the Patriots go at wide receiver? The more I look at the top of this wide receiver class in the draft, I don't think that coverage dictating definitive top of the depth chart guy is there. Maybe it's Ted McMillan. He's the closest. I think his ceiling comp is T Higgins. It's probably closer to Drake London, who's like a really strong number 2, average to below average number 1, at least at this point. Maybe he takes another step, but that's where he's been. So, and Luther Burden, Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden, I think these are high-level complementary guys. They're not guys that are going to come in and dictate coverage. And then you also have, whether it's McMillan or any of those guys, the whole wide receiver development thing, where we've seen how that's gone. So we kind of did this last week, but just to run through it again, the top PFF free agent wide receivers, T Higgins is number 1. He's their number 1 overall player. Chris Godwin is number 2, their number 4 overall player. Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, Darius Slayton, Keenan Allen, Deontay Johnson, and Mike Williams. Those are the receivers that PFF has in their top 100 free agents overall. I don't know that there's a definitive answer there. There's not guys that I necessarily wouldn't want. I think Chris Godwin to get you there as a bridge might make some sense, but as tough as it is, they may, unless they're going to do the trade market, and they got to get back to looking at that and what's going on with DK Metcalf and some of these other guys that we've heard about being unhappy. Are we at the point now where they might have to, this whole definitive top of the depth chart, number 1 wide receiver, they have to kick this thing down the road another year again?
Probably got to kick it down the road, right? And like even T Higgins, like I think is really good, and like he's in his prime years, like maybe his best years are ahead of him going somewhere to be the number 1 guy. But is he that like true coverage dictating, take over the game type of number 1 receiver, or is he a really high end number 2, average number 1 like Drake London, like you said? Like that, I think is a fair question with even T Higgins. But if you wanted to get that true established number 1 guy, I think it has to be a trade. They have to make. I know AJ Brown maybe not available now. Maybe he likes it in Philadelphia. They're not trying to make that type of move. But like they have to make that type of trade, like when the Eagles went out and got AJ Brown. Like you've talked about the DK Metcalf trade before. Like they got to make a trade like that if they want to bring in the number 1 receiver. And like how I am. Like I think you need talent at wide receiver. I don't think you can get by with just average wide receivers. But I think if you get a Chris Godwin, I would like Chris Godwin. I feel like they wouldn't have to spend too much in terms of money or years with him coming off that injury. But he would be a good fit here, good fit for Drake May. I would take Chris Godwin. If they sign Godwin and then kick the number 1 thing down the road and fix the lines, I think that's an acceptable offseason, in my opinion. Assuming they fix the offensive line, they get a legitimate starting left tackle, and they fill in the guard spots, they figure out the right tackle, they bring in veterans that are actually reliable, they're actually going to stay with the team, and maybe actually be decent. Maybe they play
have experience playing the position that they're going to be playing.
Yes, maybe they play better as a group because they have Doug Marrone, a very experienced, good high pedigree offensive line coach. So maybe they figure out that whole thing. They protect Drake May better. He has time to throw. He doesn't have to run for his life half the time. If he has like a Chris Godwin to throw to, or if they bring in like a Darius Slayton, like I'd be okay with something like that. I don't want them to overpay for a guy like like Keenan Allen or like Stephon Diggs, like those guys. Yes, good players, but I think they're past their prime at this point. Once you get over 30, it's a little dicey at that position. The drop-off can happen quick.
Diggs coming off the torn ACL, too, specifically.
True, yes. Yeah, and he had a torn ACL. Like, I know Godwin had the same injury, but Godwin, I think, is a little bit younger and I think a better fit for what the Patriots need right now. So, like, I would take a flyer on a guy like Godwin or maybe bring in Darius Slayton to be your sort of deep guy down on the outside. But I don't think they need to overextend themselves in the free agent market if it's not T Higgins. I think it's either make a trade or kick it down the road at that position.
To go back to what you said,
as far as getting the number one guy,
right? Yeah. To go back to what you said at the top of that, we all need to understand this is good for them to really get this thing like running, right? And they should be better. They have a ton of resources to be better in 2025. But to get this thing going where they're like competing for the division, right? Winning playoff games. It's 2 years minimum, just from where the roster is now to get to that point. So if you acknowledge that, and then, okay, like the wide receiver we need isn't available, unless you're going to swing a big trade, the wide receiver we need isn't available. To your point, do you push yourself for like a guy that could end up being Calvin Ridley? Or the reason I'm saying you maybe move down the road with it is you're not just throwing your hands up and say, well, all right, we got to wait another year. It's if we know we're not going to go chase that guy. Right? We know we're not going to go chase a wide receiver who's ultimately not going to be worth what we're going to have to give up to get him. Now you can just throw all the resources into offensive tackle, edge rusher, right? These other positions. So next year, when there are more premium wide receivers, you don't have to be splitting assets 10 different ways. You have the flexibility to go get the guy you want. Next year's wide receiver draft class looks better. These guys never hit free agency. We'll see what happens via trade. And I would say this. We're sitting here February 18th at 11:30 recording this. This is who's available right now. If I were to tell you, is it 22 when Tyreek Hill got traded? 21, 22?
21 or 22, somewhere in that range.
If I were to tell you, and I've done this rant like 10 times and I still can never remember the year. If I were to tell you February 18th of that year, hey, Tyreek Hill is going to be available, you'd call me a lunatic. Yeah, as you should. So like
there weren't even rumors or that kind of came out of nowhere. Happened, right?
It was like
the AJ Brown trade came out of nowhere.
Right. Well, that one people kind of knew because he needed a new contract. Hill did too, but Hill was the best receiver in the league. It was like there's no way. Like he's going to get a deal done.
Like, I'm just saying I don't remember like weeks and weeks of like where is he going to get traded? Like it sort of is.
No, I remember like a week and a half before there were a couple reports that were like, hey, the negotiations aren't going super well between Tyreek Hill and the Chiefs. And everybody kind of looked at that as like, all right, somebody wants more money. Somebody's leaking it out there. They're not happy. And then like 2 days before it was like, hey, so he's going to get traded to the Dolphins or the Jets. It's just up to him to pick. And we're like, what?
Oh, so, no. Now that you jog my memory. Yeah. The Dolphins Jets thing.
Yeah.
I remember
and it was like, it was a no-brainer choice.
Yeah.
And he made the right choice. But like, so we'll see who becomes available. But as it stands right now, if that guy's not there, I don't want them to, like, I would take Godwin, and you still need to do something. You need to give Drake May options. But like you said, I don't think you need to overextend yourself for Chris Godwin. You could also, like, maybe there's ways to upgrade the complementary pieces where you're not getting that number one, but you get a better slot than Jalen Polk. You get a better Z than Kendrick Bourne. And now you have those guys in place. So when you bring the number one in next year, boom, like everything's off and running. That's what I think Godwin would be. Godwin to me is an upgrade over Kendrick Bourne, which is good. It doesn't mean don't do it. But getting that number one guy that fans have been looking for so long, I don't know if that happens this offseason, but if you kind of look down to more complementary players, Godwin's a great example. I'll give you one more name that I kind of started looking at. Somebody actually called in a Sunday kickoff about this week, and I didn't realize, and now I've kind of seen more of it. Christian Kirk could be available. He's in the last year of his deal in Jacksonville. He had a down year last year. I mean, everybody did in that mess of an offense.
Who doesn't have a down year in Jacksonville?
So, but
they should be called the Jacksonville down years.
You hear that, Kendra Middleton? He had kind of a down year last year. He was hurt, but he's in the last year of his deal. Could be a cap casualty. If not, he's probably available for. You're not gonna have to give up a top 100 pick to get him, right? This is a guy that has high volume experience, is a good route runner, can create after the catch. Fits in that Josh McDaniels offense. Is he going to be the guy in a top 10 offense in the league? Probably not. If you get the number one guy, can he be a really effective complementary piece, assuming he stays healthy? I think so. Like, I would totally take a flyer on a guy like that. Again, He's not the wide receiver everybody wanted, but you add him, you add Godwin, you're making the team better. Now you got to go out next year and chase that big time X.
Yeah, so I don't know that Christian Kirk is the same player as he was the year that I'm about to compare him to, but the best year of Trevor Lawrence's career, the year that they made the playoffs and they came back and upset the Chargers in the playoffs. Remember that season at the end of that year? Christian Kirk, like he wasn't this explosive, big play, dynamic, receiving threat, but he was sort of the engine of the offense.
Right.
He kept them humming. And he did come up with a few clutch catches in that playoff run by the Jaguars near the end of that season. So, he could be a guy that sort of elevates in those big game situations. I thought it was interesting to see him sort of, emerge as something better than what we thought he was when he was put in that spot. And like you said, he's a good fit for Josh McDaniels. He'd be a good fit for Drake May. And so, yeah, I'd certainly take a flyer on him. I was thinking like they might have to trade like a 3rd or 4th round pick for him. But if you're saying, it doesn't have to be top 100.
Well, so some people are saying it's what you said before, like he could end up being a cap casualty.
Okay, so
right.
So it'd just be maybe a pick swap day 3.
Right, that sort of. If you find out they're going to cut him, yeah, I would take a flyer on him. So that might be, it's tough, but that might be what wide receivers this offseason. Yeah. Then maybe you try to find a gem in the draft.
Yeah, but let me just get this taken, because this feels like the best opportunity to say this.
Go for it.
Put it this way, Barth.
Yeah.
What do you want the conversation to be at the end of next season? Do you want us to come out of that season saying, oh my God, they still can't protect Drake May. He's running around. He has no time to throw. Or do we want to come out of the season saying, okay, Drake May he's been protected. They ran the ball better, but he's got to find someone to throw to. They got to get that number 1 receiver. I would much prefer the second conversation.
Yeah, it's absolutely. You're talking about at the end of 2025.
Yeah, this coming season.
It's absolutely B. And people have talked about this, that the wide receiver is the last piece. When you're building an offense, a lot of people will stress that quarterback and offensive line, there's some debate which one you go first there. I lean quarterback. The Lions are a strong case for going offensive line first. There's teams like that. But wide receiver to me comes third. That's your finishing piece. Remember the meme the year that the Bengals are trying to decide between Penei Sewell and Jamar Chase, and it's like the quarterback getting sacked where it says like anybody or whatever.
That's the graphic. Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying.
That's what you're saying.
Which part of that graphic do you want to be, folks?
I think the lower one is where it's the wide receiver dropping the ball, but I'll say that one. And then, because next year you can go ideally, like I think they can address at least their big 3 needs, right? Their big 3 needs are receiver, in whatever order, receiver, tackle, pass rusher. And they certainly have others, but those are premium positions. They're really lacking. They can address 2 of those 3 this offseason. Realistically, I think they can address 2 of those 3 this offseason. So, you'll have a new big 3 needs next year, but wide receiver will be at the top of that list. And now you can go all in on wide receiver in what projects to be a better year for that position being available.
Well, say they fix both lines this offseason.
That'd be great.
Basically fix both.
I would call that.
Not saying not going to be the freaking Eagles next year, but like say they get a good pass rusher, they fix the tackles.
It's like top half of the league in quarterback pressure on both sides of the ball. So
I think better line play, better coaching. Drake May taking a bit of a step forward, and then maybe you make a move on the margins at receiver. I think you're talking about a team that, like, I know you're talking about they're a couple years away from contending for the division and winning a playoff game. But can they be in the hunt graphic? Can they hover around 500 and hover around like threatening for that 6th or 7th seed in the conference? Like, I think if they fix the lines, they get better coaching and better quarterback play. Like they'll sort of be in that conversation, I think. And then you're talking about maybe next year, if you have a better wide receiver class in the draft, maybe you can get your number 1 receiver with the 15th pick or something. Like, I feel like that's a more viable plan than sort of overextending yourselves for a wide receiver that isn't T Higgins, that isn't on that level.